Korea stands in a very unique position distinguished from Japan or USA, that it was once a victim in Japanese colonial in Korean wartime, but then became later assailant. This is exactly the historical context in which doubleness of Korea comes from, and closely links with historical amnesia to decide what to remember and what not to. This attitude is clearly revealed through Koreans' different feelings towards Japanese comfort women and the issue of Korean soldiers having raped Vietnamese women during the Vietnam War. Koreans have been continuously requiring Japan to recognize and officially apologize about their past wrongdoings and resented Japan's previous comments that covertly hide and legitimize their past. I should say that regarding comfort woman issue, Koreans have an instinctive sense of treating Japan as their enemy. However, when it comes to Vietnamese woman issue, Koreans ironically escape from or deny apologizing about their faults. But it is still evidently true, as proved by Lai Tai-han, the second generation of Vietnamese women and the Korean soldiers. The hypocrisy did not only make people outside their countries suffer, but did further lead to neglecting its own people's rights. For example, Gwangju massacre in 1980. We therefore need to admit our Vietnamese war crime and to go through historical clearance in order to generally strengthen guarantee of human rights. In fact, it is most likely for Koreans to think that they first have to receive apology from Japan about comfort women before mentioning about their own war crime. However, this idea is from neo-nationalism, not from sufficient understanding of pains and from feeling a need to protect those weak people's rights, but actually from mere nationalism that Korean people should not have it asserted by Japan. Besides anti-Japanese tendency, it was in fact nationalism and militarism. It is true that it is hard for people to talk about what they suffered from the past, especially if it is about directly facing their own faults to have committed crime during war experience. This becomes serious when we specify who chooses to remember which memories according to the time he or she has been living for. Especially those who really had experiences of fighting in a war, they have the distinctive historical trauma unlike the younger generations who have not weathered through wars. The old generation, usually of people over the age of 50s, tries their best to legitimize the war crime. This is particularly true of soldiers who were actually drawn by Korean government to fight in the Vietnam War. Because their trauma from the war is so enormous that it still overwhelms them and makes them impossible to make rational judgment. They fail to recognize their misdeeds. For instance, participants in Vietnam War have been attacking some minor organizations in Korea, which try to help Vietnamese women who suffered from Korean Army's offense. In any part of the world, there is a war going on, and destruction of humanity seems inevitable as a definite result of war. They, however, want to still talk about peace and desire to have their human rights protected. So, they arouse their angers towards Japanese comfort woman issue, rather than discussing about their own issues of having attempted rape Vietnamese women. They cannot help themselves but to distort the history and reality. The interesting thing is that comfort women in Korea, the ones who have really experienced the misbehavior of Japan, criticize Korean government about being irresponsible about Vietnamese woman issue. Though they are also the old generation because they had different historical experience and really suffer from the violation of women's rights, comfort women empathize the pain of innocent victims and are fully aware of the fact that the pain will never disappear from time to time. This is why those comfort women have been trying their best to give hands to Vietnamese women. For example, by building Peace Museum this year in Korea to increase Korean people's knowledge on historical guilt. Nonetheless, they had difficulties with this project as some Vietnam War participants, as I mentioned before, used violence to interrupt, unwilling to admit their crime. This shows that the real empathy, even though we don't have first-hand experience, is the only solution to approach the issue of human rights and address historical amnesia. Even eventually leading to accepting our past mistakes and therefore finally form our identity.
Currently in Korea, the comfort women issue is hotly debated. To understand what the issue is about, we invited two prominent scholars, Professor Kim, a young research fellow at Harvard University specializing in Korean politics, and Professor Lee, a close friend of mine, was nominated as the best scholar of the year, also specializes in the same area. Now the debate between the two professors will begin in GCS room. Please give them an applause.
For quite a long time, the Korean government has been demanding the Japanese government for an apology on the issue of comfort women and have criticized the Japanese government for their denial and being shamelessness. However, it is quite surprising that the Korean soldiers were also assailants on this issue. Ever since Vietnam reunited in 1975, there have been numerous rumors about Korean soldiers having raped and murdered numerous Vietnamese women. The increasing awareness and spread of this news bewildered the Korean government because now they were also guilty of abusing comfort women. So, there are numerous reasons why the Korean government may be showing two faces in this issue. Despite their assertive and strong protests and arguments to the Japanese government, some reasons to what makes the Korean government hard to admit this two-facedness will be further discussed. One reason to why the Korean government does not admit its fault is that it is difficult for anyone to admit one's fault. Even for the Japanese government, despite the numerous documentaries and protests being made for several years, they still do not apologize. But instead, they're so impudent and so confident in saying that there was no force in the Korean comfort women. They say that they voluntarily chose to be a comfort woman. This argument has been made for over 10 years to shirk their responsibility on the comfort women. Thus, the Korean government may be in stage of choosing to admit whether or not they will take the shame and blame for their faults. Furthermore, it may be even harder for the Korean government to admit their fault because until now they have been standing and stating themselves as victims, but now they have to stand as an assailant. So it may be hard. It may take some time for the Korean government to pass this time of bewilderment and to admit their fault.
Does that mean that any irresponsible actions of the Korean government is allowed, or any of them being pardoned by the international community for the time being for, let's say, a decade or even more? A man ought to ask for forgiveness if he had this wrong, if he has done wrong. Because even Willy Brandt fought for the Nazi Germany during World War II, and he knelt down in contrition before the Jewish memorial. So even though the Korean government did not specifically require soldiers to commit atrocity in Vietnam, it must be held responsible. It's not a question of bewilderment. Why bewilderment? The Korean government knows it has done wrong. The past Korean president, Kim Dae-jung, has confessed already it was an atrocity. Then take some action. Now, please let me introduce one argument. For several years, the Korean government, on behalf of the sexual victims, claimed the Japanese government, owing great debts to the Korean sexual slave during its Japanese occupation of Korea. And basing on the enormity of sexual abuses committed by the Japanese army, the Korean government has voiced out a strong retort to Japan for the humanitarian crisis the latter induced. By perceiving itself and trying to make others believe that it's a victim to the Japanese occupation, Korea has established a legitimate claims for compensation and apology from the Japanese government. But the legitimization is inadequate. Today, the Korean government rejects its soldiers' involvement in committing sexual violence. This attitude is logically contradictory. While Korea believes the comfort women were unjustly treated by the Japanese soldiers during the occupation period, it rejects Korean soldiers' inhumanity in violating, Vietnamese women. The implications naturally inferred the Korean government, one, blindly negates Korean government's involvement in sexual violence in Vietnam like Japan does in the comfort of women issue. Second, it rejects the same enormity the Japanese exerted. Are you telling me to stop, as a metaphor, are you telling me to stop smoking because it's less harmful while you are smoking it before me?
Okay, I understand your point. Then secondly, another difficulty in having the Korean soldiers admit their fault at the Vietnamese War is because they also see themselves as victims. These old soldiers have also seen and experienced the worst scenes at the battlefields and have been to the lowest point of humanity. They bravely risked their lives to represent their country. But along with the lingering effects of the war, they are now being pointed at to apologize to the victims of the war. Some of these soldiers may feel guilty yet ashamed, and some innocent soldiers even unfair. Whatever deep feelings they might be feeling, the pride and the victim mentality they got from the war may be hindering them from giving a sincere apology and accepting their mistakes. Furthermore, other people also criticize that these soldiers are currently fighting most passionately about the comfort issue in Korea to the Japanese government. But what we can see from here is that these soldiers are standing up and fighting for the rights of Korean comfort women and nationalism instead of the overall rights of the women and the weak. Thus, we can't really say that they're showing two-facedness on this issue.
I've seen the passionate debate well. I want to pause here for asking a question for Professor Lee. These Korean soldiers have gone through many traumatic experiences, and these victims are confused with the war's justice. But can these experiences make their actions in Vietnam understandable? Another question is the statement Professor Lee raised. The Korean soldiers are fighting for the rights of the comfort women and not for the overall rights of the women. Doesn't the fact that these soldiers blame the Japanese soldiers for the same wrongdoings that they had committed show how they do not feel guilt from their actions? I believe that Korea is being nationalistic by supporting the comfort women while denying the rape in Vietnam. This nationalistic aspect of Korea negates the comfort women's effort in universalizing human decency and humanity as well. The Korean politics show how the government is not seeing people through the humanistic approach. The current Korean politics is not designed for the whole humanity, but for the interests of its own people.
Maybe that's right, but you must know that the Korean government is currently in an awkward situation. Admitting the mistakes in the past can also mean admitting the mistakes of the past government at that time. This is especially difficult to happen at a time like this in Korea, where the current president, Park Geun-hye, is the daughter of the president at the time of Vietnamese War, Park Chung-hee. Unlike the time of Kim Dae-jung and Do Mu-hyun, who were the left-wing presidents, it has now become harder to find evidences of such faults and criticisms of the government back then. This may be why the Korean government is currently not admitting their mistakes in the Vietnamese War, because that will also mean that the current president's father, Park Chung-hee, has made a mistake.
That's a very good point, but politics is always right. It may be true that the Korean government faces legitimacy crisis, but let's bear in mind that the bigger concern for us, for the whole humanity, is the maintenance of justice.
Now, it's almost time for our debate to finish. Let me give you 1 minute each.
So, to sum up, the Korean government is not justified in asking for compensation from the Japanese government because it is also committing the same atrocity in not admitting its fault in Vietnam. The Korean nationalism also negates the idea of universal humanity, and that nationalism is designed for the exclusive interests of the Korean people. The Korean government should and must make a concession.
Well, those were some of the points that I made why the Korean government may possibly be showing two-facedness on this issue. But I see your point, and I do think none of them are truly reasonable enough to really support that the Korean government can be protesting to the Japanese government to apologize for their shameful past, but in fact not admit their own mistakes. So I agree with you, and I do think that it is unjust for the Korean government to be showing two-facedness.
Two scholars' comments on the comfort woman issue lead us to think more deeply about it. As I see it, you have two choices. One is to simply forget what happened in both Vietnamese War and Japanese colonization in Korea. Another is to fight not only for the comfort women in Korea, but also for the Vietnamese women, thus getting rid of the historical amnesia. As mentioned before, historical amnesia is the forgetting of events that is promoted by the government, which is arguably wrong. Forgetting the psychological pains of people is not humane. Furthermore, the reason, as mentioned before, why the comfort women fight for receiving a sincere apology, as well as criticizing the Korean government, and the soldiers who raped the Vietnamese women is that the women hope that getting rid of the amnesia may prevent such rapes and other horrifying incidents from occurring again. Why is it our problem when it was to comfort women and the Vietnamese women to suffer from such incidences? Well, imagine yourself going through their pains. These women were raped and they felt so much shame after the wars that they were unable to talk about what had happened, and they secluded themselves from the society. Why did they feel guilty when they were victims of the war? I think it's because these raped women, like any other women, have pride over their body and are shameful of their used body. However, they should abandon this belief. Today, the Korean comfort women do not feel guilty of being raped anymore. This is because they now live in a society where women's rights are guaranteed. Hence, they now strive to make people to remember the truth and prevent the same incidents from ever happening again. This shows that the importance of promoting comfort women by guaranteeing women's rights. We will be coming closer to the idealized human rights for everyone.
It is time for us and the next generation to empathize with and shoulder other people's pains among one another. We cannot try to hide the sun with our palms anymore, but we need the sun to brighten the truth and our future. Not only we carry a potential risk to confront the tragedy again if we evade, but also Koreans in an opposite sense stand in an advantageous position to have been once a victim and therefore better to empathize with another victim even outside the country. This can be realized only if they first admit and be sorry for what they did in the past. Had Korean people first shown the world a proper attitude to cope with their guilt during the Vietnam War, the world would be able to realize the importance of being attentive to the offered truth. Peace cannot be built with victim mentality, but it should be founded upon their sense of responsibility. This is also true not only for peace, but also for democracy and human rights. Thus, national war crime communities also have to recognize their efforts in order to overcome their trauma and come back to what a human should be like. Only if we help sufferers recover their faith in human beings, we can then guarantee peace, democracy, and human rights. Since history is doomed to repeat, if we deny the past, we have no future. Koreans should not limit their historical consciousness into their country, but should share their memories, especially those of war experience, with the whole Asia and then further the entire earth. As Korean citizens, what we need to do now is to reconstruct our history and to develop skills to maintain peace rather than war technology.